Hello, welcome to The Nutmeg, a weekly discussion show from the Evening Standard. I'm Dan Kilpatrick. I'm joined by Simon Collins, Jack Rosser and James Robson to talk over the big discussion points from the Premier League in London this weekend. But before we get on to the action, let's talk about the European draws. Chelsea drawn in the Champions League last 16 against Atletico Madrid. A tough draw on paper. James, what's your immediate reaction to that tie?
Exciting, obviously, but it just seems really cruel given how well they played, finishing top of their group as well. You thought they might avoid the big boys, and this is a pretty horrible tie.
And Simon, in the Europa League last 32, Arsenal face Benfica, traditionally a Champions League club. It's not going particularly well for Arsenal, but that draw isn't for another couple of months, of course. But what's your immediate thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like James, where Arsenal had a great group stage, perfect record, and then they go and land one of the best teams in the last 32. I mean, there's some easy ties in that on paper, and Benfica is definitely not one of them, particularly away from home. And if there's fans in that stadium in Lisbon, it'll be even tougher. So I think it's a draw that sort of sums up the difficult times Arsenal are having at the moment.
Yeah, and talking of easier ties, Tottenham will play Austrian side Wolfsberger in the last 32. I can't say I know a huge amount about them. I've had a quick look at the Austrian Bundesliga table and they're 7th. I think Spurs overall can be fairly happy with that one. Let's get back to Arsenal. They are officially in crisis. We've been saying it for the last couple of weeks. Are they on the cusp of crisis or are they on the verge? I think we can now say for sure they are in crisis after a 1-0 defeat to Burnley at home yesterday, confirming their worst start since 1974. 4 consecutive home defeats for the first time since 1959. Truly, Mikel Arteta's Gunners are record breakers, downed by a Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang own goal as he broke his scoring drought at the wrong end. Granit Xhaka sent off, and then Patrice Evra being rather candid on Sky about Thierry Henry's alleged thoughts about Xhaka. Simon, you were there. I mean, talk us through your reaction to an historic day for all the wrong reasons for the Gunners.
Yeah, I mean, Arsenal keep breaking records this season, but not in the manner they want to. And I think, yesterday was probably going to be a pretty defining moment, I think certainly for this season and Arteta's reign. Simply because for so long, I think he's trusted these senior players. He's trusted the likes of Granit Xhaka, Willian, and they haven't performed for him this season. And yesterday felt like a real culmination of them not performing. I mean, Xhaka's red card. What can you say about it? I didn't think Arsenal were great in the first half. Start the second half, we actually saw them playing with a bit of pace, a bit of momentum. You thought, right, they're going to get into the game, and then Xhaka does that and puts them down to 10 men, and they're chasing the game and Burnley go and get the win. And going forward, Willian not performing, Aubameyang struggling. I really feel like now for Arteta, it's difficult for him to have made changes because when your back's against the wall, you look to your senior players, don't you? Why wouldn't you look to Willian? He's a serial winner. He's won things for Chelsea. He's been brilliant for Brazil. But now I think he's going to have to change it and bring in some of the kids, the likes of Emil Smith-Rowe, Reece Nelson. These guys are largely untested. But it's got to that point with Arsenal where he's got to do something else because the faith he's put in those senior players just hasn't been shown back to him.
I mean, I remember it's a bit of a trope, isn't it? When the manager's under pressure and trouble, throw in the kids because the fans won't get on kids' back. That's generally the way things go. Of course, times are a little bit different now, and the fact that we don't really have many fans there. So, in terms of just trying to get people on side, I'm not sure that will work. The problem with Arsenal is you always look for green shoots of hope, don't you, when there's any sort of crisis? And I can't see any there. I mean, you tell me, Si, is there anything to cling to that might make you think this could turn around anytime soon?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing we've had, this season going on is, those Sunday 7:15 kickoffs have been pretty miserable affairs. The Villa game, the Wolves game, they've all been like that. But you've always had that midweek Europa League tonic, which has been a sort of pick-me-up. And you've seen the young players play and the mood sort of lifts a bit. I mean, now Arsenal don't have that. They've got this run coming up now, Southampton on Wednesday, who I think is one of the worst teams they could play in terms of their style, their pressing. Then you've got Everton away, then you've got City in the Cup, and then you've got Chelsea. So those are sort of 4 games where you look at it and you're thinking, I'm not going to get that little midweek boost, which the Europa League was. It was a bit of a safety blanket for Arteta and he could sort of grab it and change the mood. But now, I mean, those young players were the shoots midweek, but are they going to be the green shoots in the Premier League? I mean, I'm not sure. They're unproven in that level. So we're going to find out one way or the other.
Jack, I'm going to come to you because Arsenal play Southampton, your beloved Southampton, midweek. They then got a trip to Everton next weekend. They're just 5 points above the relegation zone. Saints are in pretty good form. They're in the top three now, I think. How bad do you think things could get for Arsenal?
It's really difficult, isn't it? I think if you stack them up against Southampton in terms of the expectation of what you're going to get on Wednesday, is you'll get Southampton going there with a plan and something that they all have bought into and they believe in, that Ralph Hasenhüttl has given them. They're all singing off the same hymn sheet, and it's proving really effective. They're far more than the sum of their parts with his plan, and you don't see that with Arsenal. You don't see it with all of the big names they've got, Willian, Aubameyang, David Luiz. We've mentioned them all. Some of the recruitment has been atrocious. Another link with Southampton, they took Cedric off their hands in January on loan and then handed him a 3 or 4 year deal without him playing a single second for them. And, the fact that Saints got his wages paid for and I think a small loan fee, they were, patting their backs when they got rid of him in January. And it's just a sign of how unorganised things are at Arsenal. I think the one thing to mention with, if you're going to bring the kids in, is that David Moyes at West Ham, and a huge part of his turnaround has been that he wants players with something to prove and that are hungry to make a point. And it's working. He's got people that are unproven in the Premier League, and Jarrod Bowen, Thomas Souček, Ben Rama. He's turned some careers around, even at West Ham. Aaron Creswell, a lot of people were calling for him to leave, and he's re-infused them and given them, said, go out and show quite how good you are. So no one at Arsenal in those senior ranks have got much left to prove. As Simon said, Willian's a serial winner. Aubameyang has scored bags of goals in the Premier League, won the FA Cup. They've got nothing to prove. The kids might come in and show a fresh bit of zest if he does turn to them.
James, going to come to you now. Patrice Evra, after the game, as a pundit for Sky Sports, told an extraordinary story. He said he went to Thierry Henry's house to watch an Arsenal game, and when Henry saw that Xhaka was captain, he turned the TV off and they didn't watch the game and had a chat about other things. Did Evra cross a line there, do you think?
Look, it's great TV, isn't it? And we're talking about it now. I personally love watching Evra when he does his punditry stuff, because he is so, if you like, candid. He tells stories and he's relevant because he still knows people in the game. He's only recently stopped playing, hasn't he? So I think that was a fantastic insight. You do wonder what sort of an impact that will have on Xhaka and Arsenal, because to hear that's how Thierry Henry allegedly thinks, that's going to be influential. You would imagine. I think it was interesting before what we were just saying. When you think of those, when you look at the players like Aubameyang, Luiz, and Willian, is this really where we thought Arsenal were going to be going when they brought in Arteta? Because you're kind of thinking, bright young new coach. That a club maybe trying to find new ways around the transfer system, without having to spend loads of money on wages and the sort of tried and tested. That just seems totally at odds with him as a manager, and maybe that feeds into just yet another of the problems. But of course, he's the guy who signed Willian. It's him who gave. He's in charge when new contracts were given out to Luiz and Aubameyang, so he also has to take a certain amount of blame.
Yeah, Aubameyang and Willian got big new contracts before the start of the season. Simon, just finally on Arsenal, how much blame do you apportion to the likes of Aubameyang, or specifically Aubameyang, in fact, for the way he's played? Is it the case that Arsenal are not getting the best out of this superstar forward, or is it the case that he's simply not pulling his weight, particularly given the size and length of the contract he was given?
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with the sort of narrative saying that he's sort of thrown the towel in a bit since he's got that big contract. I don't think that's the case. I think he's a symptom of the problem. I don't think he's the cause of it. He's suffering because he's not getting the service he's used to, and I think I sort of touched on it last week. But he is a sort of centre forward who is heavily reliant on service. He's not the type of player who normally gets the ball, beats three players, and sticks it in the top corner. That's not what he's about. His goals normally one-touch finishes. They're getting on the end of through balls. And at the moment, he's just not getting that. And he is just sort of the focal point, the lightning rod for what's going wrong with the team. But I don't think you can lay the blame solely at his door. It's more the fact that he's not being presented with the chances that he needs to take. And again, for Arsenal, as was the case last season, when they got Aubameyang the chances, when they got him the goals, things were able to calm down. As soon as they dry up, the foundations are pretty weak and they're crumbling right now.
Let's move on from Arsenal and look at the other Big Six clubs, all of whom failed to win this weekend. I think it was the first time since December 2008 that none of the so-called Big Six won in the Premier League. Let's start with Spurs, who drew 1-1 with Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park. Now, Jack, I know you were there, so I'll come to you in a moment. I watched the game on TV. From a Spurs perspective, I thought it was quite frustrating. I thought it was a result that's been coming. They played in a similar way to the way they played against Burnley, Brighton and West Brom, all of which they won by 1 goal. I think they tried to rely on the defence to keep a clean sheet rather than the attack to score goals, which I think, given the makeup of Mourinho's squad, is not a great strategy. And obviously the contain and counter approach that got them the win over City, the win over Arsenal, and the draw at Chelsea has worked so well in those big games. But I do think they need to be more aggressive and more front foot against the so-called lesser clubs in the Premier League. Jack, I mean, what's your take on that? I mean, Spurs went 1-0 up through Harry Kane, arguably a mistake from a goalkeeper who then had a pretty outstanding afternoon. But then they just seemed to sit on the 1-0 lead. Do you think Mourinho got it wrong? Do you think he should take a share of the blame, or do you think ultimately that's a good point for them at a tough place to go?
The way the game went in the first half, I wouldn't call it a good point. It's certainly, the perspective of 2 points dropped, especially when you look at how everyone else got on and the chance it presented them. They were let off the hook a bit in that sense, but it is a big chance missed to finally put a bit of space at the top of the table before going to Liverpool on Wednesday. It's really bizarre because the first half was so open. And after a couple of sort of early scares from Zaha, Spurs looked to have sort of got their head around how to stop Palace on the break. But it was still quite an open game, but they just didn't really, aside from the 1 goal where Son laid it off to Kane and it was a bit of a pot shot, they didn't really create anything too clear cut. And Son couldn't get any space, had a fairly off afternoon in terms of getting anything on the front foot. And it just seemed a bit bizarre in that they allowed Palace to push them back. It was a sort of mirror image of the game that you expected. You expect Palace to be the ones frustrating and trying to hit on the break. But I think I wrote, you just need a bit more ambition in games like that. They've got the firepower, more than enough firepower to do it, but it just didn't seem to work. And having both Højbjerg and Sissoko for a game like that maybe doesn't sit too well. But of course, they're still unbeaten, so you can't be too critical.
Yeah, I mean, Mourinho's got form at being scarred by results, if you like. I mean, I remember at Chelsea in 2015, the 2014-15 season, I think when Chelsea went on to win the league, they were very expansive in the first half of the season, and they were actually beaten by Spurs 5-3 on New Year's Day, and he really shut up shop and kind of ground out results for the rest of the campaign. And he obviously had the squad to do it, with John Terry marshalling the defence. I think that the 3-3 draw against West Ham has had a similar effect on him. Spurs were much more open, as you saw against United and Southampton in the early parts of the season, but he's really gone back to basics since shipping those 3 goals in the last, 8 minutes against the Hammers. So, we're seeing a very kind of Mourinho approach from Spurs at the moment. James, did you have a chance to see any of the game yesterday? And what are your thoughts on Mourinho's approach? Because you've covered him as much as anyone over the last few years. I mean, could he be a bit more expansive in midfield, for instance, where he's got Højbjerg and Sissoko sitting? I mean, he's got the likes of Dele Alli who are barely getting a kick at the moment.
Well, I don't think there'll be too many calls for Dele Alli to be getting in, will there, given his form in recent times. But I take your point on that last season with Chelsea when he won the title. I do feel like, for me, my concern, if I was a Spurs fan, would be that this is pretty early in the season to be doing this. When he did it with Chelsea, that had this great start to the season, and it was kind of a case then, second half of the season, batten down the hatches, we'll grind our way to the title, and it worked. To be doing it this early with so little breathing room at the top, there's nothing between a whole host of clubs there. That would worry me, and I don't think against Palace is the time to be doing that. I don't particularly like what I saw when he went to Chelsea. I really didn't enjoy that at all, and I would want him to be more expansive. But you can say, well, that's a good point. It's a good point against a title rival. Against Palace, come on, that, especially when you've taken the lead as well. that would, for me, be a worrying sign for the future. And knowing Jose, when he gets in that kind of mode, I don't see a sudden flip of the switch and suddenly him deciding, right now, let the brakes off again. Now they're playing Liverpool midweek, to say, and absolutely, totally accept that against them. Get a draw, just don't lose that game, keep it tight, fair enough. But as I say, Palace wasn't the occasion to do that.
Yeah, I think if there's a good thing to come out of that game for Spurs, it's perhaps a wake-up call or a lesson for the players that they can't win every game 1-0. And I think it's good to have that mentality in some respects, but they'd really got into this habit of kind of grinding out results and perhaps riding their luck a little bit in the game at Turf Moor, the home game against Brighton, the game at the Hawthorns, where they weren't at their best, but they found a way to win. I think they were looking to do the same against Palace. They weren't at their best, but they were looking to just find a way to win that game 1-0, take the 3 points and go to Liverpool. And perhaps this was a wake-up call that getting the second goal, being a bit more front foot, is an approach that would work against these Leicester sides. Jack, as 10-minute cameos go, it wasn't a bad little showing from Dele Alli. I mean, my view is that Spurs don't have enough goals in midfield. Højbjerg doesn't score. Sissoko never scores. Lo Celso's only scored once in the Premier League, and Ndombele's not a particular goal scorer, which makes Ali's absence all the stranger. Do you think perhaps just the fact that he was included in a Premier League squad and Mourinho called on him, when he needed a goal, do you think perhaps it could be a turning point of sorts for Dele?
Yeah, potentially. I think, all the drama of midweek and him leaving the bench and then coming back out after, I think Eric Dyer went in to have a chat with him after he'd gone down the tunnel. It sort of, Mourinho tries to draw a line under that straight after the game on Thursday, and then this sort of does it much more emphatically in that he has been given that chance. When they're chasing a goal, Dele is the one that he's turned to, and the way Spurs played in that final 10 minutes proves that they don't need to just sit back. They created plenty of chances, and if it wasn't for Guaita being quite so brilliant for the second half, then they probably would have won the game. I think you can balance that up against Harry Winks as well, though, in that his absence was more telling than anything. In that game where we've spoken about, do you need Sissoko and Højbjerg when you're going to dominate possession? How are they letting Palace push them back? If you've got Harry Winks or someone like of that profile that can keep the ball and play it around, then you're going to move yourself a few yards further up the pitch and start creating things. And I think it'd be interesting to see, having covered him for so long and how well he was under Pochettino, what you make of where he goes next. Whether, all the talk of Dele leaving in January now switches to whether it's Harry Winks that has to go out on loan.
Yeah, I suspect Harry Winks will stay put in January unless Spurs have got another central midfielder lined up, particularly with Europa League progression. But yeah, it's not looking great for him or England. You just can't get any minutes in the Premier League. Simon, just quickly to finish on Spurs, they go to Liverpool on Wednesday. It looks like it could be, well, as it stands, it's first versus second. They're unlikely to be in those spots come kickoff. Is this a good time to be playing Liverpool, who drop points against Fulham at the weekend?
I think it is about as good a time as you're going to get. I mean, this isn't the Liverpool team we saw last season, and I think it's taken sort of 6-7 weeks for us to sort of appreciate that this isn't the same beast. I think particularly that defence is not what it was without Virgil van Dijk, and I think if anything, we've spoken here about Mourinho and his reluctance to go and attack teams. I don't expect him to go to Liverpool and go for the jugular, but I really feel like if you watch Fulham in that first half. The joy that the likes of Lookman got, even Cavallera getting in behind. Alisson made 2 or 3 good saves in that first half. And if Mourinho was watching that, he would think, if we can get Son and Kane playing like they have this season, there is a chance to go to Anfield and, really put a statement result there. It's whether Mourinho wants to do that. I would highly doubt he does go to Anfield and attack, but I think there is a strong case for him looking at that Liverpool defence and thinking, we've probably got the best attack in the league at the moment. Let's go there and attack.
Yeah,
I was at Jose's last game for United at Anfield when they lost, and the setup was much like what I'd expect from Spurs this week, which was absolutely sit back, and just hope to hit them on. You might only get a couple of chances a game, but the difference between this Tottenham team and that United team is that this is a much better setup team to utilise that system and be effective. Far better on the break, far better forwards than he had at United at that point, and a far stronger, steadier defence. So I would expect the same system but this one probably would be a lot more effective.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I'm sure Mourinho will play in exactly the same way. He played against City, Chelsea and Arsenal, and it'll probably be exactly the same team as well. Let's move on to Chelsea, whose title ambitions were dented by a 1-0 defeat at Everton. Gylfi Sigurdsson scoring the penalty, and Frank Lampard very strong afterwards, saying title talk is ridiculous, saying his squad were not ready for the title and not as experienced as the likes of Manchester City and Liverpool. James, they spent over £200 million in the summer on a host of some of the most promising players in Europe. So is Lampard justified in that kind of rhetoric?
No, I was really surprised by it, to be honest, because one of the things I've really liked about Lampard this season has been how much he's embraced the expectation that's on him and on the team after spending so much money. He knows what it's like at Chelsea. He's been there. He's seen so many managers come and go. He knows exactly what's expected of him. I totally appreciate that maybe he hasn't enjoyed the fact that everyone has been falling over themselves now to trump up Chelsea's chances. Mourinho and Jurgen Klopp all getting in on the act. So I totally get that maybe he saw this as a good opportunity just to check all of the excitement, if you like. But I just wonder how, if you say that too much, does that start to get through to the players? Because in every way, you look at that Chelsea squad, it is a squad set up to win a title. They might not win the title, and they're not favourites to win the title. I don't think, I certainly don't think they're favourites, because Liverpool and City have got the winning know-how, the expertise of the managers they've got. But I think Chelsea are in with a really good shout. So to come so strong by saying how ridiculous it was and talk up, we don't have players like these clubs have got, I just thought that was a really odd thing to say. And maybe he was caught in the moment, very frustrated with the way his team played, which was pretty poor. They were pretty easily contained by Everton. And maybe just in that moment, he got a little bit wound up and just wanted to get it off his chest. But I don't think it's something he should be repeating.
And Chelsea now haven't scored against Klopp's Liverpool, Mourinho's Spurs, Solskjaer's United, and now Ancelotti's Everton. Is that a slightly concerning pattern?
Well, it's a pattern. There's no denying that, and it's an interesting one to look at. When I was looking at that statistic, you pick out the great managers in Ancelotti, Mourinho, and Klopp. You can't say that about United, but it's another big team that they haven't scored against. I think, but when you look at those games individually, they had a penalty against Liverpool, hit the post twice against Everton. Really, Werner scored that goal. It was just offside against Chelsea. So they had chances, but maybe this does start to get into players' minds if this run continues. When they come up against City or Arsenal, does this start to get into their minds? Well, why are we not scoring against the bigger teams, if you like, or the bigger managers? It's just an interesting one, I think, to watch.
Jack, Chelsea are missing Christian Pulisic, who was so good after the restart last season, really electric and rightly tipped to be a potential star of this campaign. Do you think his injury issues are becoming obviously they're becoming a source of frustration, but are they becoming something to be concerned about? He missed the game against Everton through injury.
Yeah, certainly. It's been going on for such a long time. I think he had a fairly slow start at the start of last season and then missed a big chunk from New Year. The game at Brighton, the draw at Brighton on New Year's Day, he played and then had problems after that. And the way he played in the restart showed just how much he can bring to this team. He's on a different level to all of the other options, even to Werner. Werner creates so many chances, but Pulisic is so more efficient in taking them and really got into that mode of just 1-2 touch finishes during the restart. So he's a huge miss for Lampard. And obviously you then, when he's such an important player, you get the temptation to rush him back if things perhaps aren't going your way, which is another big thing that Lampard has to deal with. But this is where the talk of all the, saying that the title talk is rubbish from Lampard is a bit strange, because he does have so much depth that he could go in there. Ziyech has had his injury problems as well, but he's another fantastic option. Werner, Mount can play out there, Hudson-Odoi. His squad's so blessed with talent there that it shouldn't be a huge problem, but a player of Pulisic's quality, you're always going to miss.
Just finally on Chelsea, and just briefly, Simon, Petr Cech making his return to action tonight in a development game against Spurs. Slightly strange one, but from what you know about Cech, will he have kept himself in good nick during his time on the coaching staff?
Yeah, well, I think his most recent goalkeeping appearance, I think, was for a hockey club down in Surrey, wasn't it? He was playing a bit of ice hockey, so he's certainly someone who likes to keep himself in shape. I think that when he was announced in that squad list, I remember it was sort of near the start of the season, everyone's sort of eyebrows were raised, and then when it was actually explained by Lampard and Chelsea that, in the most unpredictable season we've got with the coronavirus pandemic and everything, it actually seemed like quite a clever idea to have someone who, in an absolute last case resort, you can throw in and get him in the team. So the fact he's going to have a few minutes for the youth side, it will be interesting. I'm sure Czech will love that, and I'm sure Chelsea fans, if there was any opportunity near the end of the season for Czech to try and even just be on the bench for a game, I'm sure it'd be greatly appreciated. But I think it's quite clever by Chelsea in the environment to have someone as an emergency backup like that. And again, a more show of their strength of depth for the title challenge that Lampard doesn't believe exists.
He was standing in front of me going to a game the other day, and I can tell you he still looked in very good shape. He looked like he was ready to go out on the pitch there and then. I don't think he's been eating burgers and hot dogs, let's say, while he's been out of action.
Hasn't gone down the Neville Southall retirement route. Right, let's finish on West Ham, Jack. A big win against Leeds this weekend, to move up into the top 5. David Moyes really proving people wrong, it's fair to say, and rebuilding his reputation, kind of recapturing the form he showed as Everton manager. Is he changing the perception of both West Ham and himself, do you think, or is it too early to say?
I think he's certainly on the way. He's certainly changed his own reputation. I think even as far back as his first press conference as West Ham manager in his first spell, he sort of admitted that he had some, repair work to do reputationally after United, Sociedad and Sunderland. And his big mission, it was the same after he kept them up first time, but he never got the chance. And it's definitely the case this time. And since they've been safe last season, his sort of vision has been to shake off the cliches that have hampered West Ham for so long. He always said when he went there as an opposing manager, he knew they had a characteristic of being flaky, and if you put them under pressure in an awkward position, they'd just collapse. And that is changing. They showed resilience. I think it's the first time in quite a while that they've come from behind to win at Leeds. I think they'd only done it once in their 26 Premier League games before Friday night. And it's all coming from, we mentioned it earlier, the hungry players that have something to prove. But there are also some outstanding performances from Angelo Ogbonna at the back. Balbuena's come back in and been brilliant. And then Declan Rice and Thomas Souček in midfield are just outstanding. And in terms of midfield duos in the Premier League, there are a few that come close at the moment.
He's a very interesting character, Moyes. He's a real believer in the power of positive thinking. You saw that at Everton, even when in really bad times, he really galvanised that club and galvanised the fans. I heard a story of one time when he went to a fans forum and they were out for blood, and he stood up in front of them and said, "Just stick with me. I know what I'm doing. We're going in the right direction." And he is that type of character, and he plans very much for the future. And he's one of those who you feel, if given time and if given the backing to actually build, he can build, and he's proven that now. Whereas in between this and that United job, he was, he's been battered here, there, and everywhere. But given time, I think we're seeing what he can do.
So it was genuinely realistic for West Ham this season.
It's a really difficult one because obviously you get the talk of European challenges, but it feels like there are so many clubs that could break into that this season. Leicester were in and around it last year, but have a real chance at top 4 this year. Southampton are another one. And it's just a question as to whether West Ham can stay the course. I mean, they've lost Antonio and the goals became a little bit of a problem, but from set pieces, they've stepped up. They need everyone to stay fit. If they lose someone like Souček or Rice, then there are huge problems there. If they can keep it up, then maybe top 8 is a very realistic ambition. But I think after the last few years, top 10, they'd be more than happy with.
And finally, Simon, Said Benrahma slowly starting to have an impact. I think you watched a little bit of him at Brentford last year. If he can get fit and really up to speed in the Premier League in the new year, for example, how big a weapon do you think he could be for an improving West Ham side?
Yeah, I think he's a massive asset. I remember a few times we got to Brentford in cup competitions and in the Championship. He was the one for me. out of that famous front three that really stood out. I know Watkins got the high-profile move, but Benrahma, there was just a bit about him, and you could see why people drew the comparisons perhaps a bit, ambitiously to the likes of Hazard. But the way he sort of cut in, created chances, and he was someone that Arsenal and Chelsea both scouted, lots of Premier League scouted, and West Ham, I think, did really well late on in the window to bring a player like in. And I think Moyes as well needs to be applauded. We've spoken greatly about him today, but also how he hasn't just thrown Benrahma in. He's gradually brought him into the team, made his earn his place. And I think towards that sort of January, February time when Benrahma's fully settled, we'll see the best of him. But he's a player who will definitely change that West Ham attack and give them another dimension. Great, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks so much for your contributions, and thanks very much for watching. We'll be back next week with another episode of The Nutmeg to talk over the big discussion points in the Premier League. Thanks for watching.